So a pleasure it is to be serving under your chairmanship and to speak on the debate so elegantly introduced by the Honourable Lady, the Member for the Gower. I think there are two things to look at. First of all is the question of the Bill of Rights, which the Honourable Lady from Walthamstow said I might mention, because it is trying to impose an American construction on the British Constitution, and I don't think in that sense it actually works. The example I'd give is that it's much forgotten that the British Bill of Rights has a right to bear arms. It actually has a right to bear arms for the maintenance of a Protestant militia, which may be more welcome with some of the honourable members opposite than it is personally with me. The Second Amendment in the US Constitution maintains, I see the honourable gentleman from Strangford is nodding in favour of having a Protestant militia. The similar US Bill of Rights, its Second Amendment, maintains the right to bear arms, again for the purpose of a militia, and that has become an absolute in the US Constitution, whereas our right to bear arms has been gradually changed by Parliament over the centuries so that it is completely controlled. So I don't really see what the petitioners are trying to achieve in what they ask for. They want the right to be particularly protected, but that is not a protection. It's a protection protectionless, because any subsequent act of Parliament would automatically change it in whatever way Parliament decided. And therefore, as my right honourable friend, the member for New Forest West, correctly pointed out, there is no greater protection than being an act of Parliament, and that is already the situation as it exists. And there is not a majority in Parliament to change it. Whether there is a majority, and we've heard some opinion polling would like to see it changed in the country at large, is another matter and a matter for debate, but the law is as solid as it can be from the point of view of those who are in favour of abortion laws as it is. And therefore I think the petition misfires on those grounds alone, and it would make no sense to introduce this into the Bill of Rights that the government is bringing forward, which is actually dealing with the relationship between the executive, the legislature and the courts, rather than trying to move to a codified constitution, which, as far as I'm aware, is not the policy of His Majesty's government. If it were the policy of His Majesty's government, I'm not sure I would be supporting it. But I think the Bill of Rights as proposed is a very sensible step in establishing how the executive and the judiciary relate now that we no longer have the ECJ sitting above us. But it's not right for this particular proposition brought forward by the petition. There is then the issue of abortion itself, which underlies obviously the whole of this debate. And it seems to me that it is the greatest sadness that the number of abortions that take place each year take place. The honourable gentleman, the member for North Antrim, pointed out it was 214,869 last year. I think all sides would agree that this is a matter for the deepest sadness. There is nobody who welcomes abortion. There is nobody who wants there to be this very high level of abortions. If you think of it over the period since the Abortion Act came in, over 10 million babies have been aborted. We know that in Northern Ireland there are over 100,000 people alive today who would not otherwise be alive had Northern Ireland had the Abortion Act that the rest of the United Kingdom had. And we know this to be true because the pro-abortionists complained about this and went to the Advertising Standards Authority, and as I understand it, the Advertising Standards Authority said the number being claimed was actually lower than the reality, not overstated. So, to the point made by my right honourable friend, the member for New Forest East, he said we can't look at it in terms of numbers of cities and people like that. But we can, because there are over 100,000 people in Northern Ireland who are alive today who would not be alive had Northern Ireland had the abortion rules that we have in England, Wales and Scotland. And that seems to me to be a modern tragedy, that there is this number of people who are no longer, had no opportunity for a life because they were ripped untimely from their mother's womb. And when we think about this, and we think of the numbers of 214,869, in a four-year period, the destruction of life is as great as it was in the four-year period of the First World War. Those are the numbers that we are dealing with And that is the tragedy of abortion. And, of course, I'll give way.
May I just slightly correct what he's just said? It's not the destruction of life in many cases. It's the destruction of potential life, unless one agrees, as I think he would agree with our honourable friend from Congleton, that life begins at the moment of conception. But most people don't agree with that. They believe it develops during the course of gestation. And that's why my right honourable friend and neighbour is right when he says that the embryo acquires rights along the way, but not from the outset.
Well, my right honourable friend raises the question of the viability of life. The viability of life, when does that start, Sir Charles? When do you think a life becomes a fully independent, created life? Perhaps my right honourable friend thinks that we should be like the ancient Romans, the newborn baby. St. Marcina, who rescued newborn babies who were exposed in ancient Rome because their life wasn't viable without intervention, without support. They were allowed to die until the early Christians went and saved them, thought to be peculiar for doing so, particularly, as it happens, disabled babies. And we know that the abortion laws that we have allow for full-term termination, full-term abortion for babies with minor disabilities, as my honourable friend, the member for Congleton, pointed out. This is the tragedy of abortion, of the destruction of life. And my right honourable friend wants to quibble about when life begins, and I accept this is perhaps more a theological question. What is the start of life? But that new embryo has that potential for life. It has been formed as a separate being that is separate and different from the parents from which it came. And of course I give way to the Honourable Lady.
For the Right Honourable Member for giving way. Does the Right Honourable Member agree that in cases such as fetal abnormality syndrome, ectopic pregnancy, where the life of the woman would be put at risk, that abortion is acceptable to the Right Honourable Member in those cases? Or does those lives not matter?
The job of doctors is to save life. And it is quite clear that the job of a doctor to save life means that an ectopic pregnancy that may threaten the life of the woman carrying the baby is one where an intervention may be made to save the life of the woman. That is perfectly traditional and acceptable understanding of how you maximise the saving of life, but you don't pretend there isn't life, because there is. There are two lives, and I give way to my right hand friend.
Not keep intervening, but I take a slight objection to the use of the word quibble. I readily acknowledge that there is a vast uncertainty and grey area at the point, or at least the part of the spectrum, at which potential life becomes a viable human being. But just because you cannot identify an exact point in the process doesn't mean that at the beginning of the process, the fertilized egg is only a potential human being without the same rights as the viable human being at the end of the process has.
But the viable point is one that my right honourable friend admits he cannot define. But there is that clear point of conception where you have a new genetic entity. It is unbelievably clear and straightforward. To say that there is some later date, and it may be 21 weeks or 22 weeks or 24 weeks, is not the heart of the argument. The heart of the argument is actually that this new life started at the point of conception, and the tragedy is the 214,869 lives lost last year. And, of course, I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Given the train of thought that he's coming up with, would he support the rights of women to choose to have an abortion were they a victim of rape or incest?
I think the destruction of life is wrong. I do not believe that you should say that a new life should be destroyed. I do not believe that is the right of the state. And I think to put it in a Bill of Rights, even if we were the United States, even if we had a Bill of Rights that is the same constitutional standing as theirs, then my honourable friend, the member for North Antrim, is right. That he said that bills of rights are usually about protecting and preserving and ensuring that people are able to get on with their life. And this is about destroying life. This is the cult of death. It is the great tragedy of abortion, and that it is considered normal. And that this extraordinarily high number of babies that are destroyed is something that should sadden us all to the depths of our souls. And the idea that we would protect something that is so wrong and ignores that second life, and that we should say that that is an absolute right on a par with free elections, seems to me to be an absolute tragedy. So I think this petition misfires. I think it's wrong constitutionally, but it's much more wrong morally, because it prefers death to life.